Imagine commanding the largest naval invasion in history, a fleet of 4,400 ships carrying 140,000 soldiers, all under your command, sailing to conquer a nation. Now, imagine watching that entire force vanish beneath the waves, swallowed by a typhoon. This isn't a myth. This was the reality for Kublai Khan. It was one of the most spectacular military blunders in human history. But it was just one chapter in the story of a man who was both a nation builder and a destroyer, a celebrated unifier and a foreign conqueror. He was the grandson of the legendary Genghis Khan, and at its peak, his empire controlled the lives of nearly a third of all people on Earth. But his story is far more complex than just conquest. From a story of paradoxes of a Mongol nomad who became a Chinese emperor, to a ruler who preached tolerance while his armies practiced brutality, and an empire that shone brilliantly before collapsing in on itself. This is the complex legacy of Kublai Khan. To understand Kublai, you have to go back to his grandfather, Genghis Khan. In just 2 decades, Genghis Khan had forged the largest contiguous land empire the world had ever seen. He was a force of nature, but he left behind a critical problem: succession. The Mongol tradition wasn't about a simple father-to-son inheritance. A great council, the Kurultai, would elect the next great Khan from the ruling family. This system was designed to choose the strongest leader, but in practice, it fueled intense rivalries between Genghis' sons and grandsons. The empire was already beginning to splinter into 4 separate khanates across Asia. When Kublai's older brother, Mongol Khan, died unexpectedly during a campaign in 1259, there was no clear heir. A power vacuum opened up, and Kublai and his younger brother, Arik Bochi, both made a claim for the throne. Arik Bote had the support of the traditional Mongol nobility back on the steppes. Kublai had the support of his armies in China. The result was a bitter 4-year civil war. It devastated the Mongol heartland and tore the family apart. Kublai eventually won, but the victory came at a huge cost. The once unified Mongol Empire was broken for good. The other khanates in Persia and Central Asia would give him respect, but they would never truly obey him again. Kublai was now the great Khan, but he was an emperor with a fractured empire, so he focused his ambition on the land he already controlled, China. He would do something his grandfather never could. He would conquer it all. The final prize was the Song dynasty. Rich, cultured, and populous, it was one of the most advanced societies on Earth. But to get to it, Kublai's armies had to overcome a massive obstacle: the twin fortress cities of Xiangyang and Fengsheng. For 6 long years, a garrison of just 8,000 Song defenders held out against a Mongol army of 100,000. It was a brutal, grinding siege. Finally, in 1273, Kublai's engineers, using massive trebuchets designed by Persian experts, smashed the city walls. The fall of Xiangyang was the beginning of the end for the Song. As the Mongol war machine rolled south, the Song dynasty's resistance became a story of tragic defiance. One of its most famous figures was Yuan, a scholar official and chancellor. Captured while trying to negotiate a truce, he was brought before Kublai Khan. Kublai, who respected talent and courage, offered him a high position in his own government. But Yuan refused. He famously told the Khan, "I am the Song's chancellor. I cannot serve another dynasty. I only desire death." For years, Kublai kept him as a prisoner, hoping he would change his mind. He never did. In 1283, Yuan Tianxiang was executed, becoming an immortal symbol of Chinese loyalty and resistance. The end, heartbreaking act of the Song dynasty played out on the water. In 1279, at the Battle of Amen, the last remnants of the Song navy, 1,000 ships crowded with the royal court and loyalists, were cornered by the Mongol fleet. After a fierce battle, the Song were defeated. Rather than face capture, a loyal minister named Lu Shifu took the 8-year-old child emperor, Emperor Bing, into his arms. He looked at his sovereign and said, "The affairs of our state have come to this." Then he leapt into the sea, and they drowned together. With that act, the Song dynasty, which had ruled for over 300 years, was extinguished. Kublai Khan had done it. He was the master of all China. With China secured, Kublai established a new dynasty, the Yuan, and he set out to rule not just as a Mongol conqueror, but as a Chinese emperor. He moved his capital to what is now Beijing, calling it Dadu, the Great Capital. And in the summers, he would retreat to his legendary palace, Xanadu, known to the west as Xanadu. Thanks to the Venetian traveler Marco Polo, Xanadu became a symbol of unimaginable wealth and splendor. Polo described gilded halls, lush gardens, and a grand mobile palace made of cane. And in many ways, he wasn't wrong. Kublai's court was a dazzling, cosmopolitan center. He invited Buddhist lamas, Muslim astronomers, Nestorian Christians, and Confucian scholars. He once famously told a visitor, "I honor and revere 4 prophets: Jesus Christ, Muhammad, Moses, and Sakyamuni Buddha." He also invested in his new empire. He expanded the Grand Canal, a vital waterway linking northern and southern China. He established a postal system with relay stations that amazed foreign visitors, and he was the first ruler to introduce paper money as the sole currency for an entire nation. But beneath this glittering surface lay a much harsher reality. The Grand Canal wasn't built by magic, it was built with the brutal forced labor of peasants, who often had to give up their entire harvests to the state. And for all his talk of tolerance, Kublai's government was built on a rigid ethnic caste system. At the very top were the Mongols. Below them were other non-Chinese people from Central Asia called the Simu, who often served as administrators and tax collectors. Below them were the Han Chinese of the north, and at the very bottom were the Southern Chinese, the people of the newly conquered Song dynasty. They were the most populous group, but they had the fewest rights. A later Chinese emperor would write that the Yuan dynasty's downfall was sown in this discrimination, this policy of trusting only foreigners and shunning the native Chinese. It was a colonial system, plain and simple. As emperor of China, Kublai inherited the idea of the mandate of heaven, the belief that the emperor ruled everything under the sky. He took this seriously, and it led to a series of disastrous military campaigns fueled by hubris. He demanded tribute from Japan. When the Japanese samurai refused, he launched his invasions. The first, in 1274, was turned back by a storm. The second, in 1281, was the colossal fleet of 140,000 men. For weeks, they were held at bay by Japanese defenses. Then the typhoon struck. The Japanese called it the kamikaze, the divine wind. It shattered the Mongol fleet and the myth of Mongol invincibility. His armies also invaded Vietnam, Burma, and even the island of Java in modern-day Indonesia. Again and again, they were defeated not just by local armies, but by dense jungles, tropical diseases, and fierce guerrilla resistance. These failed campaigns cost a fortune in silver and lives, draining the Yuan treasury and weakening Kublai's authority. When Kublai Khan died in 1994, he left behind an empire of contradictions. He had unified China, but ruled it as a conqueror. He had fostered trade and cultural exchange, but through a system of ethnic segregation. Today, his legacy is just as complicated and contested. In China, he's often portrayed as a Chinese emperor, the founder of the Yuan dynasty, a unifier who brought the vast Mongol world into China's orbit. But for many Mongols, he's a figure who abandoned his nomadic heritage to become too Chinese. That tension still exists. Recently, when the Chinese government pushed for Mandarin-only schooling in Inner Mongolia, it sparked protests from ethnic Mongols trying to preserve their language and heritage, a direct echo of the cultural clashes of Kublai's time. So how should we remember him? Was he a visionary ruler who created the Pax Mongolica, a golden age of peace and trade across Eurasia? Or was he a brutal colonizer who imposed a foreign oppressive regime on tens of millions of his subjects? The truth is, he was both. It's easy to fall for simple myths. The myth of Xanadu as a fantasy paradise ignores the reality of life for the peasants who built his empire. The myth of the Mongols as only savage destroyers ignores the sophisticated statecraft Kublai used to govern a vast and complex nation. And the idea that the Yuan was just another Chinese dynasty is a harmful simplification. It wasn't. It was something different. A foreign conquest dynasty that fundamentally changed China, for better and for worse. Kublai Khan's story is a powerful reminder that history is never simple. Great figures are rarely just heroes or villains. He was a man of immense ambition, who ruled a third of humanity, built a capital that would become Beijing, and inspired legends that still echo today. But he also ruled with an iron fist, bled his empire dry with costly wars, and presided over a system that treated millions of his subjects as second-class citizens. He was the Mongol Khan who would be emperor. And in trying to be both, he created a legacy as fractured, brilliant, and tragic as the empire he left behind.